Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jessica Niekraz. I'm with Smart Policy Group and the US Biochar Coalition. Today we are here to share a little bit more about our organization and the really exciting opportunities that lie ahead for biochar. First and foremost, we'd like to thank Wendy and the IBI team for inviting us to participate in today's symposium. Additionally, we'd like to thank the folks who signed up for the webinar and experienced a change of platform for your flexibility. We're really glad to have you here. A little bit about the US Biochar Coalition. We are an industry trade association that seeks to unify the voice of biochar, agriculture, forestry, climate tech, and carbon removal. These stakeholders, we plan to advocate for and develop markets, policies, and economic conditions to catalyze biochar industry growth. Our mission is several-fold. First and foremost, advocate for legislative policy and regulatory action to build and open markets. We seek to raise federal policy, legislative, and regulatory awareness for the benefits of biochar systems and break down the barriers to growth. Additionally, we seek to deconstruct silos between the biochar business community and end-use market sectors, looking to cross-pollinate opportunities for growth. And finally, we really are focused on uniting industry leaders, creating opportunities for collaboration, and building a platform for action. And with that, I would like to take up no more space, but introduce our presenters for today. And first up is Amy McCrae Kessler. She is one of the co-founding members of the USBC. Pardon me while I move over here. Amy is the president and co-founder of Facet Power and a managing director and co-founder for Quintessential. Amy was a founding board member for the American Biogas Council, and she served as director for 10 years, leading the organization's growth from 20 companies to over 400 members. An environmental lawyer, entrepreneur, and policy expert, Amy chaired the council's policy program for 12 years. She also led a 4-year complex stakeholder initiative to develop the council's digestate standard and certification program. Her experience is a great benefit to our organization, and I will turn it over to Amy to talk about the biochar market potential.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us here to talk about biochar. I think that there could not be a more exciting time to be talking about this industry and changes afoot in thinking about how to grow it. We are at a moment where the industry needs to scale and grow exponentially. And breaking down barriers in the US market to allow that to occur is one of the primary reasons that the USBC was formed. The current market as it stands is basically dominated by smaller producers, usually producing 50 tons of biochar a year or less. It is dominated by basically biochar-only business models, and the carbon credits. You'll hear from Sebastian how that carbon removal credits have come in to kind of change the dynamic there, which is a fantastic development. But only 8% of producers in the United States make renewable energy products. And that, I think, has limited the ability of the biochar industry to grow for reasons relating to attracting project finance. And then we have seen a real focus on research, academic research, that I think needs to move more towards applied research out in the field to help move, I think, public and regulatory perception towards biochar as being more of a proven technology rather than something that's nascent. It does happen to be one of the most advanced negative emission technologies in the world, the most readily scalable, least cost per ton of carbon removed, and has a myriad of benefits for agriculture, nature-based markets, built environment, decarbonizing hard to decarbonize materials, and for rural economic development, all of which are fantastic points for us to be making in our policy work at USBC. So when we look at the market here, the barriers that we have seen are business models that are not making the most out of the revenue benefits and risk mitigation, as well as finance attraction opportunities with a biochar system. And we have seen a real focus on primarily agricultural markets, or there is some focus on water filtration, but there are markets that are not high volume and are very dependent on very particular customer adoption that is typically a slower cycle. So one of the things that we would like to do is address the growing markets around soil health protection and defense. The drought is a significant issue. Replenishing soil health in degraded areas, not necessarily related to agricultural performance, serving the nature-based markets, which are one of the fastest growing investment trends of our time and will be more well capitalized than oil and gas by 2050. And biochar should and can underpin everything that happens in those markets. We'd like to see opening markets to mine reclamation and higher volume applications, and kind of thinking outside of the box of where biochar has been focused. So those are things that we're going to be working on at USBC, as well as encouraging the entry of higher temperature and standard technologies, and really developing some strong standards and metrics around biochar performance. Another thing that holds biochar back is the inability to do long-term contracting for biochar, very essential to project finance models and being able to attract that so that we can roll projects out. And the more that we are able to specify biochar for specific purposes, I think the closer we move toward being able to address that barrier and move around it. In the meantime, I'd like to see the industry working on integrating energy, not only because it provides one of the fastest paths back to 1.5C, so you can make carbon negative energy and carbon removal through the biochar, and then place it in a way that turns on additional carbon removals and local benefits. But it also is a much easier way to attract finance while we are waiting for those biochar markets to grow through what the work USBC will be doing, and hopefully the rest of the biochar and adjacent industries will do as they come in to join us in this work. So I'm going to pause there and I think leave more for questions at the end. But I do want to say that we are right at the precipice of being able to take off. And the work that USBC is doing around policy, around measuring the size of the industry and the economic impact, around bringing industry players together to talk about challenges and brainstorm solutions around them, and to break down silos and cross over into adjacent markets that would be end users, is essential to growing the biochar industry. This is an industry that can, should, and will be a billion-dollar industry if we all work together to do it. So I hope you will join us at USBC in working on that mission.
Thank you so much, Amy. Next up is another founding member, Sebastian Manhart. He is the co-founder and director of US Biochar Coalition and a senior policy advisor at Carbon Future, a leading global high-quality carbon removal credit platform. Sebastian is an economist and brings a wealth of global policy, biochar, and CDR market experience to the coalition, having served as an advisor to German Chancellor Angela Merkel, an advisor at the World Bank, and a tech entrepreneur. Sebastian is also the chair of the board of the German Carbon Removal Trade Association. And without further ado, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'll I'll try to build on what Amy said and give a bit of a European perspective. I should also mention I'm the lead of policy lead for the European Biochar Industry Consortium, which is a kind of the equivalent of USBC in Europe. And so I see my role a lot to cross-pollinate from the US and Europe when it comes to biochar policy. So today I want to give a little bit of a picture of what is happening in Europe when it comes to biochar, and then really focus on what can we learn. The learning goes both ways, but for the purpose of this presentation today, for this short kind of input, I'll focus really on the Europe to US direction. So first off, the EBI, so the USBC equivalent, has existed for quite a few years, and under the leadership of Hans-Jörg Lerchenmüller, whom many of you will know. I would almost call him kind of the godfather of biochar. He's involved in all things biochar in Europe. What it does, which is really amazing, it collects industry data every year, confidentially from hundreds of producers. It validates it against what was predicted the year before, sees where we are, and then projects it into the future. And so it gets a really accurate image of where the market is at. And actually, it produces every year a market report that I highly recommend looking at. And so a couple of things. In Europe, high level, we've removed 90,000 tons of CO2 in 2022 with biochar carbon removal, and we're predicted to remove 150,000 next year, or this year in 2023. We've seen a compound annual growth rate of 56% over the last 3 years, and that is projected to grow to 68%, and these are significant growth rates. So if you think about photovoltaics, we had growth rates of around 34%. So we have very high growth rates right now. And a lot of that, and this is interesting because Amy just mentioned that, most biochar producers in the US are 50 tons or more. 80% of the volume in Europe is driven by medium to very large facilities. 37% of the entire volume is driven by a handful of very large facilities. So we're really seeing the whole growth of the biochar industry not being driven by people doing biochar in their backyard, but by the creation of high technology, modern, clean pyrolysis plants that produce biochar, that produce syn fuels, that produce energy. And so that's really the direction of travel that we're seeing in Europe for the biochar industry. 6 plants already have technology readiness level 8. 4 plants have technology readiness level 9. And that is really unique. There's no other durable carbon removal in the world that can demonstrate these levels of technology readiness level. We're seeing 70% of all biochar being certified. This is huge. It was only 50% just a few years ago. So we're seeing a clear trend towards certification and biochar credits, which is, again, a sign of the maturity of the market. And we expect that biochar in Europe alone will be able to remove 6 megatons of CO2 by 2030, which is 120% of the overall EU target for permanent carbon removal for 2030. So what can we learn from it? I pulled out a couple of learnings. So first, gathering and analyzing data, and this is something that I imagine USBC will be doing quite a lot in future, is creating this intelligence year over year in terms of where we are and where the market is heading. The second one is really focusing on high quality, large scale biochar production. So we've got fantastic manufacturers of technology in Europe, including USBC member Pyric, and they are really delivering these plants that can produce not just biochar, but also fuels and energy. And that's the direction of travel that we want to see more and more in the US as well. In terms of regulation, Europe is blessed with high quality biomass regulation through the RED III directive, which takes a lot of heat and pressure and worries out of the sails of skeptics, because we've already regulated what it looks like to use biomass. So that's something we really need in the US, is a lot of solid biomass use and sustainability regulation. And the final one that I would say is policy itself targets. Denmark, for example, has a dedicated biochar target of 2 megatons by 2030. And having that clear focus on what biochar can and will deliver helps with all the other stakeholders getting in line. But yeah, I'll leave it there. I'll leave room for questions, but I hope that gave some interesting insights into what we can learn from the European biochar market for the US.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sebastian. So we've heard about where the market opportunities lie and what USBC is planning to do it based on the learnings from the EU. And next up is Carrie Annand, who is a senior advisor to USBC. Carrie has nearly 20 years of public affairs, government relations, leadership, and communications experience across many areas. She previously served in the press office of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce. Carrie is the executive director at the Biomass Power Association based in Washington, D.C., and is the executive director for the National Energy Resources Organization, a networking group for energy professionals that holds regular events in Washington. Carrie is going to share with us what's happening from the legislative perspective, and I will turn the floor over to you, Carrie.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Jessica, and thanks to Amy and Sebastian for their expertise. As Amy said, this is an exciting time to be in the biochar space. And as Sebastian says, we definitely have our work cut out for us in elevating biochar and expanding markets and here in the US. And fortunately, there are quite a few members on in Congress who are who are paying attention to biochar and who have introduced bills to advance these goals. And I thought that I would just highlight a few of these today. One is Senator Manchin and Senator Barrasso have introduced a bill to revegetate and sequester carbon. And this is significant because Senator Manchin and Barrasso are the chair and ranking member of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Interestingly, part of their bill is to set up a carbon market to fund the Forest Service for more wildfire prevention and wildfire mitigation strategies. But part of their bill is to establish a pilot program with the FDA and the USDA to study the use of biochar as a cattle feed amendment. Using biochar, other countries use biochar in cattle feed to help aid in digestion and to reduce the amount of methane that is released via cow burps. So that's something that is very interesting here, expanding the markets and the uses of biochar right now. Biochar is not an accepted cattle feed amendment, but with FDA studying it, taking steps toward approval would open up another market for biochar here in the US. Additionally, Senator Grassley has introduced a bill that he's introduced in the past. And this is also a bipartisan bill, along with Senator Tester, Senator Thune, Senator Brown from Ohio. And this is called the National Biochar Research Network, which this bill would study the use of biochar in different soil types across the country. Just provide more understanding of how biochar can benefit farms and be used on farms. And then finally, Bruce Westerman, who is the chair of the Natural Resources Committee on the House side. He's from Arkansas, and Chairman Westerman is also a registered forester. He has a lot of knowledge in the forestry, biomass, biochar space, and it's a keen interest of his as well. And he will be introducing a bill next week that will establish demonstration projects across the country in every U.S. Forest Service district across the country to study the commercialization of biochar and also to award grants to biochar producers. These are just a glimpse of the legislative opportunities for biochar right now. As many of you know, there's a farm bill every 5 years, and 2023 is the year of the farm bill. We are not expecting a farm bill to be finalized by the end of this year, but by the end of this Congress, hopefully. So that's what we call a vehicle for some of these bills to become law. And we would love your help in convincing other members of Congress to adopt these bills and to make them law. In my experience as a trade association director and lobbyist on the Hill, it's all local, and the ability for our members to go to their representatives in Congress and say, we need this and here's why. That's really the most powerful lobbying there is. So if you're able to join USBC and help us make the case, we certainly would appreciate that. And finally, I will mention that we also have well-established relationships with some of the federal agencies that are in charge of regulating the industries. U.S. Forest Service at USDA and DOE, as well as NRCS. So, those are also opportunities to influence policy. After a bill already becomes law, you can influence the interpretation of the law and be aware of opportunities for grants and things like that as well. So that's just an overview of what's happening in Congress with regards to biochar, and I will turn it back to Jessica.
Thank you, Carrie. And finally, our final speaker for this morning is, last but not least, Lauren Breynaert. She's a founding co-founder and director at the US Biochar Coalition and public affairs director at Mino, an industrial-scale biochar carbon removal project development company. Lauren brings years of invaluable experience building, uniting, and leading coalitions of diverse stakeholders, helping them find common ground and building long-term cooperative structures to achieve climate goals. Lauren, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm with Mino Carbon, and a bit of background on our company. We are a startup based in Washington State. We're building large-scale carbon removal facilities that intake sustainably sourced waste biomass to produce about 40,000 tons of biochar per year. And in the process, we're also generating renewable electricity. We will be the largest, once we come online, the largest biochar production facility in North America, which is really exciting. And just a bit of background, I have been in the climate policy space, both at the federal and state level, for many years before joining Mino. And when I joined Mino, the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA had just passed, and I was scanning the documents, having not really been a part of, the biochar world before joining Mino, and just was blown away of how little biochar incentives, facility funding, tax credits were carved out for an industry that, biochar is one of the most proven and developed carbon removal, tools we have. And so I knew that there needed to be a stronger voice for the industry at the federal level. At that same time, I'm, running through Mino's business models and seeing how many of, 45Q does not support biochar sequestration. There was limited grant funding possibilities for what we are doing. So, with the farm bill coming up, I, starting to brainstorm how we could build up the voice of the biochar industry, and, cross paths with Amy and Sebastian. And together, we co-founded the US Biochar Coalition, which, as Jessica mentioned, is a trade association. We're bringing together a cross-section of biochar producers, carbon marketplaces, biochar carbon credit buyers, equipment manufacturers. You can see our current members on this slide. We are, at the precipice of growth, I think, for the biochar industry. And we need to have a strong, unified voice at the federal level in order to see the incentives that we need to grow the industry. as an example for our company, we need additional tax credits to support what we're doing. We are building what will be the largest carbon removal facility, in the US. And at this point in time, we are seeing greater incentives for other carbon removal technologies like DAC and other, kind of clean energy, clean transportation options such as hydrogen. So we need greater funding. I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to build this with our members, and we are actively recruiting other folks to join us. We need a big tent. We don't need just biochar producers. We need the full spectrum of the biochar marketplace. So if you just go to the next slide, just a quick overview of what we're jumpstarting. We, as a trade association, we will be, developing out our industry policy priorities. First up is the upcoming Farm Bill, but next up will be, tax credit support. We need to make sure that, DOE and USDA grant funds that come out have a carve out for the biochar industry. I submitted letters back in, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, for the USDA fertilizer production expansion program, which originally did not include biochar. And through our comments, there was a carve out for the biochar industry, and we saw a host of applicants, including our company, that we were able to apply for up to $40 million to support our facility. So, also to mention, we'll be hosting fly-ins, networking happy hours. We need to cut the silos between DOE and USDA and bringing in large ag and energy companies to the table, and to have conversations of how we can work together to grow the industry. Through US Biochar Coalition, we will have a dedicated DC lobbying team to advocate for our efforts. We will be having, working groups to discuss key issue topic areas. In our first recent board meetings, we are already collaborating on how we can influence DOE's new carbon credit purchase and procurement program, and coordinating an effort there. So I really encourage others to join in. And I'll just mention, next week we have some really exciting events. We will be in DC next week, Tuesday. We kind of have an unofficial launch of the US Biochar Coalition. We'll be having a Hill briefing, bringing together U.S. Forest Service legislators to talk about the barriers and opportunities for bioindustry growth. And then we will be actually testifying in support of a bill that Carrie mentioned, where one of our members, Metzler's Forest Products, will be testifying in a hearing in support of biochar commercialization, followed by an industry happy hour. So, really great, exciting events. We are just at the beginning of building this, so it's a great time to join in and really help us build the future of the biochar industry. So, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. We are going to open up the floor for questions. So if you have any, it looks like we have a great start already, but always open to checking out more. From Wendy, she has a panel question. How does the U.S. legislation affect the global biochar industry?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. In general, US legislation can have a huge impact on the direction of any carbon removal industry, including biochar. We're seeing this right now with direct air capture, and with essentially billions of dollars being invested into direct air capture in the US, it changed the landscape of the global direct air capture industry. So that is where we see the potential of the United States in shaping the global industry. We're not there yet for biochar, right? Like, there is all the potential, and that's what we want to realize. The US can drive the growth of a global biochar industry, but it requires specific actions that we discussed in the last 20 minutes to be taken in the US. So potential is there. The US has done it before, but we need a bit of work, and that's exactly what USBC is for.
Yeah, I think I would just follow on to that. I would When Sebastian and I were first talking about USBC and forming it, one of the things that being a U.S. environmental and international environmental lawyer, I've always sort of looked at what the EU did and with admiration in terms of their environmental laws and policies, and the U.S. often being 10, 12, 15 years behind on those. I think the EU legislation is actually having a much broader impact on what's happening in the world of biochar as it impacts corporations trading globally. But one thing that I think is very interesting about US legislation and impacts internationally is I think biochar here in the United States has an opportunity to grow significantly based on some of the domestic content laws in the IRA and in some of the bio-based manufacturing initiatives. I see biochar being able to grow in the United States to fill in some of those gaps in reducing the carbon intensity of advanced manufacturing and products for energy storage and otherwise. And as the US does that, that then can influence growth of biochar markets in other countries, because you'll see the rise of it here. It will be a little bit closed off, and other countries will look to protect their domestic markets, and biochar will appear as a way to do that. But it's a very interesting question, and one I think that we'll be working on further.
And I'll just jump in here too and talk a little bit about how, I want to echo what Sebastian said about the U.S. And our ability to lead the policies of other countries through our policies. So, that's clearly one way that we can support the global biochar market. And then, as Lauren was talking about with 45Q, if biochar is actually able to get credits for carbon sequestration, which it's currently not able, it does not qualify for 45Q, but it does the same thing as carbon capture in many ways, or maybe even better, because you get a product out of it as well. So, that's something that I think if we were able to incorporate biochar into 45Q, it would really have an impact not only on the US market, but it would really send a message across the world about the role that biochar can play in carbon removal.
Wonderful. There is a question in here. I don't know if we want to expand on it any further. From Julia Taylor, is anyone able to speak to Q45? And we've had brief mentions of it, but is there anything else that needs to be said?
So for those who aren't familiar with 45Q, it is a tax credit program for carbon removal and storage, carbon capture and sequestration. And in the IRA bill, the Inflation Reduction Act that Amy mentioned, it actually increased the potential value that you could get per ton of carbon captured. And, as I mentioned, biochar production, despite the fact that biochar has a very similar impact to carbon capture and sequestration, or maybe even better, it does not qualify for 45Q. And that is really important because 45Q, the values are such that it's starting to help CCS technology become more feasible for a lot of energy industries. And if biochar is able to participate in 45Q, that would infuse a lot of capital into the industry and help support biochar producers and hopefully help us establish markets as well. So hopefully that answers the 45Q question, and we'll look for other ones in the chat as well.
I think I just wanted to add on to 45Q. I would encourage folks looking at that with biochar to think about the existing carbon removal credit markets as being a much more lucrative option for you to tap to get credits for biochar carbon removal. In thinking about how biochar might apply to a 45Q situation and looking at the impact or intent behind it, it really is to serve carbon capture and store anthropogenic emissions. And I think that the role for biochar there is to there's a whole movement afoot to develop biochar that has special surface functional groups that can actually hold CO2. And there is a market for biochar to play in carbon dioxide removal. And that's one of the things that hopefully we will start to work on at USBC is elevate the conversation around that. One of my partners works on that particular issue. So I think that there's looking at it from a different angle of how biochar might apply or participate in 45Q. But I think that there's much more lucrative options in the carbon removal credit markets that are a much better fit until we can circle around and have biochar included as a form of additional CO2 capture coming from anthropogenic sources.
Thanks, Amy. I want to note that a few links have been dropped into the chat regarding reports. One is the European Biochar Market Report, and the other is Scaling to the Skies, which is a report on designing a new tech-agnostic 45Q. All right, next up. One of the questions was, how do we track the legislation as it proceeds?
Join the USBC is how you do it. Carrie?
Yeah, we'll keep you posted. I mean, as you know, as a trade association, we'll be talking to these offices regularly about the progress of the bills. And then, you know, as I mentioned before, we can take all the help we can get in terms of, you know, it's one thing for Chairman Westerman to introduce a bill, and that says a lot that a chair of a House committee has, you know, thinks biochar is important enough that he introduced a bill, you know, and which is a good start, but there is a lot more that needs to happen behind the scenes to actually make the bill become law. And, you know, so, you know, whether you're in California or Maine or Iowa or wherever, you know, your ability to talk to the people who represent you and tell them what's important is something that we need. And that's what the coalition is all about, is us, you know, sharing the message of biochar and sharing what needs to happen to support the industry. So, you know, there's a lot between the introduction of the bill and it becoming law. There's a lot that goes into that. But, you know, we will be reporting regularly to members on the progress of those bills and on what you can do, whether it's signing a letter, making a call, attending a fly-in to meet your members in person. Those are all things that can help elevate the industry and help elevate these bills.
And I would just add that joining as a member, one of the things that is a benefit is every 2 weeks, you will be on the line with the policy team, hearing updates on how things are going. And we have a system of tracking all of the relevant bills, what's happening. We've got relationships behind the scenes. So you will stay up to date that way, as well as receiving legislative alerts or requests to take action. And that is really one of the best ways to stay informed, because it is a sort of a rabbit's warren, staying up to date on some of these things and informing the USBC. Being able to provide that to biochar producers and anyone with an interest in the industry was incredibly important, because it's very difficult to find funding opportunities or when you should be advocating. So that's a major benefit for joining the association. And we'll be starting those calls in January. So hopefully folks can join before then to take advantage.
All right, I believe we have time for maybe one, maybe two questions left. The next one I have here is from Kim Chaffee. Is there any way to move the grant-making process of the US DOE and USDA to be more technology agnostic?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I can talk to the Department of Energy in particular, and then I'm happy for others to talk about USDA. So the Department of Energy, I've actually had several conversations with them this week about this very topic, and they are trying to design tech-agnostic programs. So if we look at the public procurement pilot, for example, that we shared the link of here, it is designed to be tech-agnostic. The only requirement is that technologies prove that they have essentially equivalency when it comes to durability and permanence of carbon storage compared to, say, direct air capture. But by design, they're open and they're tech agnostic. So we're seeing that the Department of Energy historically has a mandate to focus on very specific types of technologies, but their desire when it comes to carbon removal is really to be very broad. So I think it's good news for us. It's good news for this industry, and really the ball is in our pitch now. Like, we need to put forward good proposals. We need to show the DOE what good carbon removal, good biochar production looks like. If we put it on their radar, they will happily support it. But it's up to us now to move it forward.
Yeah, and there's typically a process where the agencies will do a request for information about a certain topic. And it's incredibly important to have an organization like USBC with dedicated lobbying staff watching all of these different opportunities, because submitting comments in that opportunity, that informs the RFPs or grants or FOIAs that come for the next several years. It takes a while to start influencing changes in technology, and it's a behind the scenes thing. It is a public comment thing, and I think if we work it through all angles through an industry association, I think we'll be able to make some change there.
Mm-hmm. One other thing I wanted to mention is we need to make biochar production and, with the diversification of technologies, a priority area for USDA, for, DOE. I'm definitely seeing a lot of grants come out, and, our industry is not specified as a priority area. This needs to change. So I think having these conversations around the urgency of including biochar, pyrolysis, gasification, co-energy production is really important.
Yeah. And this is one thing we did at American Biogas Council, was breaking down silos, because if you talk to the veto office of USD of DOE, they're very into what's going on around biomass energy and biochar. That's the Bioenergy Technology Office. But then if you talk to other offices of DOE, they're at complete counterheads. So that's something that we definitely want to address.
Wow. All right. I think we have hit time. There are a ton of really great questions in the comments area. So we are going to see if we can get a copy of those and maybe continue to address some of those questions on our LinkedIn page. That said, go like us. US Biochar Coalition. We'd like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you to IBI for having us on this platform, and many thanks to our speakers today. It's really just, we're at a precipice, as Amy mentioned earlier. It's a real exciting time to be here.
Thank
you,
you,
everyone. Have a good
Thanks,
rest of the
everyone.
conference.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.